Hello, a very good morning to one and all. This is time to start the webinar. I request all the participants to keep their turn their audios. Request them to keep their audios muted so that you do not disturb or interrupt the speaker. I hear lots of background noise from different participants. Kindly turn off your mics, please. Do not turn your audios on, please. Well, here we go. Smile a while you smile, you travel a mile. A very good morning to all the participants and a hearty welcome to all the participants to this national level webinar on the importance of communication in teaching learning process. At the very outset, I would like to welcome all the participants who are participating in this webinar across the nation and overseas as well. Let us begin this webinar by invoking God's presence on all of us. May I now request Mrs. Sridevi Prabhu, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to sing the invocation hymn.
वक्रतुण्ड महाकाय कोटिसूर्यसमप्रभा निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा. Salutations to the Lord with curved trunk and large body, Sri Ganesha, whose splendor is equivalent to million suns. O Deva, please make our undertakings free of obstacles by extending your blessings in all our works always. Showers of blessings, showers of blessings we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead. There shall be showers of blessings. This is the promise of love. There shall be seasons refreshing, sent from the Savior above. Showers of blessings we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead. There shall be showers of blessings, precious reviving again. There shall be seasons refreshing, if we let God have His way. Showers of blessings we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead. But for the showers we plead. But for the showers we plead.
Thank you, madam. May I now take this opportunity to welcome the resource person of the webinar, Professor S.R. Ramesh. Sir, we are really glad to have you as our resource person of this webinar today, and I extend a hearty and warm welcome to this webinar on behalf of the principal, management and all the teaching fraternity. A hearty welcome to you, sir. I also would like to extend a hearty welcome to all the participants from across the seas and the participants who are taking part from different parts of this world, and also my teaching fraternity to this webinar. May I now request Ms. Pooja, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to introduce the resource person of the webinar to all the participants.
Good morning, one and all. I, Pooja, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, take this opportunity to introduce today's resource person, Professor S.R. Ramesh, to the participants of the webinar. Professor S.R. Ramesh is the retired principal of Vasudev Somini College. He has 37 years of vast teaching experience. Sir has specialized in the fields of European drama, theatre workshop, play production translation, cultural studies, and many more. He is the member of prestigious academic bodies, professional and service organizations. Sir has published and edited many books. Some of his popular books are Karuvira Ganive, Dvipa Higondu Sanjay, Desi Sanskriti, and many more. Sir has directed nearly 150 plays and documentaries. Sir has worked with illustrious theatre personalities like B.V. Karan, Girish Karnad, K.V. Subbanna, Prasanna, and many more. Professor S.R. Ramesh has been felicitated from various organizations, and he is the recipient of Dr. Ramakrishna Shikshana Ratna Award, Karnataka Academy Based Teacher and Theatre Activist Award, and many more. So it is a great pleasure to have Professor Ramesh as a resourceful person for today's session. Once again, I extend a warm welcome to you, sir.
Before we hand over to the resource person, I request all the participants once again to keep their mics muted so that you do not interrupt the speaker in between the session. And the feedback link will be shared in the chat box of both Google Meet and in the YouTube. After the session is over, you can fill in the feedback and then you can receive the certificates. And the talk will end by 12 o'clock and you have half an hour for interaction. Those who would like to ask any questions or clarifications are requested to post their questions in the chat box of Google Meet and YouTube. And some of the questions will be filtered and they will be answered by the resource person depending on the time availability, and the other questions will be answered later. So having said this, I wish you all the best for the webinar and I request the resource person to take over. Thank you.
Good morning. Well, I must thank the organizers for having provided me an opportunity to share my views on communication, especially communication in a classroom. I thank you all for attending this program. Before I go into my presentation, I would like to share a very famous folk phrase in Karnataka, which I think is very popular among Kannada-speaking people. The saying goes like this: Idi Ratri Ramayana Keli, Beligge Ramanigu Sitegu Yen Sambandha Anta Kelidrante. The rough translation of this would be in English like this: throughout the night they listened to the story of Ramayana, and in the morning they questioned the reciter, what's the relationship between Rama and Sita? I'll come back to this folk phrase at a later stage, or perhaps you would understand the relevance of it after listening to my speech. Now let's try to understand the importance of communication of late. Communication has taken a very strong position in the modern world. And many people say for a successful transaction, could be business or relationships, anything, especially relationship between countries. Everything depends on the kind of communication that people engage with. So, how do we define communication? There's another problem, because the ambience of communication is so huge that it cannot be put into one hold-all expression and say that this is what we really mean by communication. It could be anything. Like, for example, exchange of ideas, or it could be exchange of information, or persuading somebody to follow what the speaker intends to say, or sharing one's emotion, or anything. All these things, yes, put together, it's part of communication. Communication can also be silence. Even in silence, we communicate a lot. And then there is another thing that we need to understand, that today, of course, we have different channels of communication. Now, it is not just like in-person communication or sending messages today. Using all this electronic media and various suffering on various social media, the communication possibilities of communication, I think, is really something amazing, and only one has to really understand. To understand the intricacies of that, one has to go through all these in detail. So now, before getting you or taking you to this, the different types of communication or the importance of communication, let me tell you one thing. Now, this, of course, is very important, because a teacher in a classroom is basically believes or has to have good communication, like an actor on stage. So, actor's performance is scaled or understood more by his behavior on stage, which includes both speech as well as kinesics. Similarly, a teacher also has to have wonderful speaking skill, followed by wonderful body language. So how do we equip ourselves with these things? Now, that is one thing. Many of us, we get it shared by our own interest. Some are trained in that field. And of course, today, personality training or training in personality development or in speaking skill has become a very important course, and I think teachers must be exposed to some of these things in detail. Now, let me begin with take a few lines from one of the famous English poet, T.S. Eliot. Well, what he says, he's speaking something about, he's providing us a situation where it is breakdown of communication. Communication is not taking place. For example, in a poem, The Hollow Man, he says, between the conception and the creation, between the idea and reality, between the motion and the act, between the emotion and the response, falls the shadow. Between the conception and creation falls the shadow. So there is breakdown of communication. So that, of course, is a modern metaphor, or of course, that's a metaphor that indicates the absurdity of life in the post-Second World War. Similarly, there's another situation given by another famous poet, Samuel Beckett, in his play, Waiting for the Godot, where there are two characters, they're together, but still there's no communication between them. They're talking, but talking nonsense. In a situation, both of them, they say simultaneously, do you? And Vladimir says, pardon me. Estrigan says, carry on, doesn't matter. Vladimir says, no, after you. Estrigan says, no, you first. I interrupted you. On the contrary, ceremonious A, punctuous P. Finish your phrase, I say. Finish your O. Both of them they say. Vladimir says, Maroon. That's the idea. Let's abuse each other. So their intention was something different. They wanted to share their ideas, but in the bargain they could not, and finally they settled down to accuse each other. So this is another situation of breakdown of communication. Something is wrong with this. So, okay.
1 minute, sir, I just called.
Okay. Some trouble here on the screen. Doesn't matter. I continue with this. So I was explaining to you that there are these situations which explain to you that there is a difference between what you call a situation where communication is taking place, and there's another situation where there is some kind of disturbance in communication, breakdown of communication. So this breakdown of communication is also a possible communication in the postmodern world. Well, I'll come to it a little later. Now, let us try to define communication so as for a common student of communication, what it would be like. Well, the dictionary meaning says communication is nothing but to share or to participate. Considering all the definitions on communication, like exchange of ideas, sharing emotions, seeking information, commanding, understanding, etc., etc. Communication perhaps is giving, receiving, or exchanging ideas, informations, signals, or messages through appropriate media, enabling individuals or groups to perceive, to seek information, to give information, or to express emotions. Well, like that. This is perhaps is a hold-all expression now, so it involves everything. But mind you, when I say communication, the stress is not on the communicator or one who speaks. The stress is also on the person who receives the signals, or the receptor, or what we call the listener. So for this good communication to take place between the speaker and the listener, they must have a proper frequency of, they must be at a common frequency, I would say. And it so happens most of the time that we miss this common frequency. Both the speaker and the listener, in most of the occasions, may not be at the same plane. So there could be variation. So in that case, well, good communication doesn't take place. Now in communication, let us say, what are the important things? Well, of course, I said about the channels. There are various channels with which we employ we share our thoughts. Another thing is, when I say communication, sharing, or participating, two things are very important. One is verbal structures or verbal communication. So the other is non-verbal communication, and that which doesn't use verbal. So let's put it this way. Verbal communication, something that rests upon the use of language. A language is used as vehicle of expression. The other non-verbal expression or non-verbal communication involves so many other things. Like it could be facial expressions, gestures, posture, then the appellate structures of language, or body language, proxemics, kinesics, paralanguage, etc. These are all the different things that we come across in normal non-verbal structure. So before taking you through this verbal structure, which of course is rests on language or linguistic expressions, let's try to understand this non-verbal communication. Now, I think we give a lot of importance to non-verbal communication, as we know very well. We send a lot of communicative signals through our non-verbal acts. And predominantly, the non-verbal acts affects us while perceiving more than the verbal structures. I just give you an example. By just looking at a person, without even interacting with him, without even talking to him, we just say, I don't like him, and I don't like her. Now, this perception of liking or disliking, without even having built the contact, is possible because our perceptive modes are controlled by various other things. It could be because of the appearance, it could be because of the posture that he or she is providing us. So like that, there are many ways with which we try to communicate each other. So when it comes to facial expressions, I think face has a lot many things to communicate. And we use it, especially in a space like dance or in a space like theater. Facial expressions do take a very important role, and especially the eyes, the positioning of the eyes. We call it eye contact. And eyes are used to communicate very different kinds of emotions. So, in facial expressions, though most of these are individually controlled, individually, defined by the attitudes and the kind of cultural upbringing of the person, still there are certain common expressions. For example, smile is a smile wherever it is. It could be in India or in the West or wherever it is. Any person who smiles is a smile. Or if one gets anger, the way the face, the contours of face changes, it is common. So there is a sort of universal code in facial expressions. Though it is highly individualistic, yet we find some sort of universal code in it. And then we have gestures, which I think is very important, and it is also socio-culturally coded, because all these gestures, like positioning of sitting position, or it could be using of arms, legs. Sometimes gestures are very pleasing, sometimes are vulgar, sometimes are rugged, sometimes the signals are very non-acceptable. So these are the things. So we like something, we don't like something. So gestures, especially today, in modern communicative systems, they play a lot of important role. So what kind of gestures that one has? Some of the unwanted gestures like scrubbing your nose or playing with your ears or scrubbing the hairs, etc. Sometimes it may not be accepted people. So they appear to be wrong gestures, may give you wrong indications also. So one need to work out pleasing, acceptable gestures. Then of course we have paralinguistics. That is, any language for that matter has all these qualities of tone, stress, tenor and timbre of the voice, etc. The same sentence, if it is said in a different way, it can look like a command. It can be persuasive, it can be caressing, it can be taking care, it can be nurturing. All these things, all these attributes are provided to the morphological structure of language, and these attributes provide us a greater communicative understanding. So we use it in our daily conversation. Sometimes we present it. It speaks of the quality of authorization. It speaks the quality of commanding. Sometimes the speech will be very hazy. If the proper stress is not provided, if sentences are not spoken in the right way, it could mean differently. It could provide you a casual atmosphere, or it could mean that there is very well understood and or lot of input is being provided to the content registration. But I'm using all this. I have not yet covered the point content. So mind you, we come to content only at a later stage. We can understand the content part of the message only when we have understood the forms of it, form of communicating. If the communicating presentation or if the communicating system is not in the right path, then automatically the content will be lost. So that is what I think majority of our teachers may have to understand, especially when they're functioning in the classroom. So more than parting or more than passing on the information, it is how we make a presentation of it. So that I think is very important. So similarly, posture, it is also culture specific. Of certain postures which are atoned with in certain class and caste may not be found in different class or caste. It is also gender specific. So how postures vary from feminine or masculine gender, how it varies from according to the social stratifications, according to the hierarchy in the society. So all these things could be taken into consideration. And another thing is, we can cultivate these habits too. With proper training, postures and gestures could be cultivated so as to make it more acceptable. And then we have proxemics. Now this is very important. Proxemics is nothing but the distance that one has to maintain between the speaker and the listener. So normally in a classroom, I take the example of classroom because that's where I think you're all familiar with. Normally in a formal way of arranging a classroom, we see students on one side and the teacher on the other side. And some of these teachers would prefer to use the lectern and they don't want to move away from the lectern. So they think that they are well positioned as long as they're using lectern. Some, they stand on the platform and then they try to address, it's almost like a pulpit speech. Whether you like it or not, you have the feeling of commanding the students because the students are at a lower level and the teacher at a higher level. These are the positioning itself creates a kind of a barricade in communication. So there are teachers who would go around the classroom breaking this barricade of proscenium, what we call as the difference that makes the platform and the sitting area. So this is also possible. So as long as teacher creates a friendly atmosphere in the classroom where the students are taken on par with the speaker's position, well then there could be the frequency of communication will be good and they almost work on the same plane and it's easy for both speaker as well as the listener to understand, to comprehend the issues. So this is very important. And then, of course, other than this, we always create this social distance because whenever we talk to a stranger or some person, we try to maintain the distance, maybe what we call as our private space. Like almost all individuals do have that private space which they don't want to be violated by any stranger. And among the different gender, like male and female, also this proxemics operate very well because they don't want to cross the borders and intimidating each other. That becomes a very important question. Like, so this is what we try to understand. So proxemics also explains or defines the quality of communication. And then we, of course, we have, as I was telling you earlier, through eyes, how do we communicate? Before coming to this, I would like to say, in communication, perception is also equally important. So we perceive things through our sensory organs. So whatever the mechanical energy in the social environment is translated into sensory perceptions through all our sensory organs, like it could be eyes, nose, tongue, or scale, anything like that. So today, what has happened, the visual perception has become very important because we are all tuned to watch things than hear things. So listening is becoming a very less accepted activity today because more everyone is into visual codes. So these visual codes are also very important. So how do we try to understand through these visuals? But there are many things, for example, when I use a word, these 4 words are very common in our comprehending of substances through eyes. We see, we look, we stare, and we gaze. So the seeing and looking is also different. There's a lot of difference between seeing and looking. And then there is stare, and then there is gaze. I would, of course, given a chance, would have taken you through a poem. Words was a wonderful poem, The Daffodils. Because when you go through the poem, you come to know what is the scale of the seeing and gazing. It begins the poem with, he saw 10,000 daffodils at once, and then finally arrives at, use the word gaze at the daffodils. So there's a lot of difference in the texture of seeing. And then of course there's a saying in English as well as in Kannada, seeing is not believing. In Kannada we say, pratyakshvagi kanru, pramanisi nodu. Because whatever that you have seen may not be true. There could be some possibilities of something beyond. So truth lies somewhere else. So even that's also true. But anyway, visual codes are of course taking a predominant role today in this modern world. And then of course we have auditory images, that is through listening, through our ears we hear things. In a classroom more or like it is auditory images, which perhaps a student has to rely upon. Of course, we use a lot of smart boards and other things, teaching aids, etc. today in a modern classroom, but still, predominantly, the engagement is more of speaking and comprehending. So, how do we build these things? And then, of course, we have other things which are very important, but I don't go in detail with all those things. For example, the touch, of course, is very important. And then you have taste and smell. This is how we perceive things. And many times these are very individualistic because taste varies from individual to individual. Even smell also, olfactory images also varies from individual. Some people like the smell of burning tar. Some people may not like it. For some, it could be perfume. For others, it could be very nauseating. So like that, there are various likes and dislikes as long as olfactory images are concerned. Even taste-wise also, there's nothing like universal, secular, democratic taste as such. Though, of course, due to television programs of late in India, there seems to be what you call as democratization of taste. So whatever that is shown on the television is practiced in almost every house. So the taste is almost democratized in that way. So otherwise, taste varies from individual to individual. So, and then of course, lost, and perhaps not least, is appearance, especially we go by appearance today, especially in a civilized world, whether it is correct or not. I'm not getting into that debate, but we perceive things based on appearance. Appearance may not be true once again. I accept that. But still, so what is acceptable appearance? Well, those who have studied management science would certainly know what is acceptable presence, especially in a corporate world, some other places. They insist on a perfect kind of appearance. Or in other places, we insist on uniformed way of looking, way of appearance, because we do not want to have discrimination among the students based on the dress, etc., among in any cultural atmosphere or an educational atmosphere. So that is also taken care of. So then, in any communication, so one thing I must tell you here, in any communication, the non-verbal communication overrides verbal communication. So I must tell you this very seriously, because any teacher or any theatre person who acts on the stage must think that his non-verbal presentation is always, it overrides his verbal presentations, because verbal codes will come only at a later stage. So now we can go back to our principal issue, because all these things that I discussed, well, may not be, of course it is useful for a teacher. He has to cultivate it or to create a good communicative atmosphere. Any person for that matter has to think on these lines or provide, or maybe he may have to put more effort to understand some of these things so that one can present it. When I use the word, and I put in my theatre experience here, because we insist on an actor in any theatre program to cultivate some of these things. So at the beginning when the student comes for a rehearsal, he may not be equipped with all these things, but as he progresses further, as we start continuing with our rehearsals, we try to imbibe some of these things, like what is a presentable position, posture, what is not acceptable, how one should get into the role, etc., etc. So all these non-verbal codes have been taught during the process of the rehearsals, and only then perhaps he can go on stage with so much of confidence in him that he can face the group of people whom we call the audience. So now coming back to this verbal structure, which I think is very important. There is a saying in Kannada, Matu Muttu, Mauna Bangara. There was a time, or perhaps even today it could be followed, that most of the time we do not encourage people to talk. Especially among the children. When children are there in the house, the parents insist on those children not to speak. Especially when visitors visit house, children are not supposed to speak. As you grow old, when the children are initiated into a classroom at school, the teachers say, don't speak, silence. Now we use the word silence quite often in our classroom, that many times the student find it difficult to speak. The speaking skill is crushed right from the beginning. And we do not entertain children to speak. So the linguistic ability of a student is almost diminished in the very early days of one's schooling. We need to reposition ourselves in this particular issue. When I say verbal structures, predominantly we are using language, because otherwise without language we find it very difficult to communicate anything for that matter. So some such activity has to take place in a language. So what is language? I don't go into the detailed definition of it or a technical definition of language, because there are very different kinds of definition to define the functioning aspects of language. But to put it in simple words, it's a group of words in any language if we are using it as a communicative mode of expressions. So a language is a group of words formed into a sentence which has definite meaning. which is shared by that particular linguistic area. So if we take that into consideration, it is a structured program. So that we have to understand, because it is not assemblage of phonemes or what you call sounds. Your sounds have to be formed with some purpose, a definite understanding. For example, what we call the minimal unit of language is morpheme, is a word. So word has to have an arrangement of phonemes, a particular alphabets put in a particular order means something. A jumble of alphabets may not create any word, and that's of course it creates no meaning. So, now what is important here? Language is structured. Then more than that, it also has to have a meaning. The semiotic aspect of linguistic expression is very, very important. So, I use, to take the words of Ronald Barthes or de Saussure, they use it in different ways. They call it signifier and a signified sign. These are the three words normally they use. So, for example, let us say the object is tree. So that is signified. So this signified object is signified through an expression called signifier, that is the word tree, the tree. So the signifiers and signified or related in such a way they create a meaning, which is understood, shared by that particular linguistic area. Now, all these three are taken into consideration. So let us say we agree that language is vehicle of communication, and it has to have two people. One is sender, another is receiver or listener. So in communication, if it has to take place effectively, both speaker and the listener must have wonderful relationship or appropriate functional relationship. Otherwise, it's quite likely that it might either bounce over or it might not reach. So this is something that we all follow. There's an expression in Canada most of the time. They say, well, I've been listening to her for the past 2 hours, but still I could not make out what she is intending to say. This is a very common expression that we use. So we listen to somebody, but we don't understand what it is. Now I think you can go back to the first folk phrase that I referred in my talk. Ratridi Ramayana Kede. So, listening act by itself is not important. Listening act also has to communicate to us the content manifestation. It has to have the content manifestation. So, where did it go wrong? Was there any problem in the speaker? Did he not render the story properly? Or what was the problem of the listener? Was he really concentrating on the story, or was he asleep during the midnight? Because time is very important throughout the night. He might not be awoken. So all these things are taken into consideration, or maybe the channel of communication may not be good. He might not have listened to it properly. So when we consider these various stumbling blocks in communication, there's a possibility that good communication might not have taken place. So we need to work on that. So especially the speaker and the listener could be one. There could be a personal communication, or it could be with few people, a group of people, a group of students. Then even there, one need to have good communication. So in verbal communication, we have two situations, very common. I'm not going into detail some of these things for lack of time. So one is what we call as the in situation, that is the speaker as well as the listener or in one particular situation and they're exchanging ideas. There is always a possibility of either correcting oneself or going in for reinforcements or repeating, etc., etc. These are all possible because they are in one situation. But whereas the other situation is called reported situation. So where something has happened and that being reported to another person who is not part of the situation. So there the reported situation, the speaker has to be very effective. Normally it could be a messenger or somebody. So he need to be very careful, because if he doesn't share the idea with all that intention, then there's always a possibility that he may lose it. So there one need to work on that. So then we have different various methods of verbal communication. We have expressive function. Well, these are all very common activities in linguistic activity. I'm just using some of these words, so don't get worried about these definitions. In any external communication, speak has a great importance. The verbal behavior of a speaker unfolds his personality. Now let us try to understand that. So we are talking, the speaker is saying something about, is discussing a chapter in quantum mechanics in a physics class. Before the student understands what quantum mechanics is all about, the student is trying to understand through the expression the personality of the teacher. The words that he uses, the way he constructs sentences, the way he behaves, the way he expresses himself, these are all being pursued by the student before getting into the core subject, what is called quantum mechanics. So this is an expressive function of language. That is, each speaker, as he is speaking, something that he wants to share, he is also at the same time unfurling his personality. He is also showing himself. So Johnson says in a wonderful line, he says, language shows a man. So you don't require a mirror, a language shows what he is, who he is. There's an interesting Kannada phrase also, "Bai bitre bandigedu." Take care before you speak, because if you use something wrong expression, it speaks of what you are. So, and there's also another saying, one who knows language will not quarrel, and something like one who knows his diet will not fall sick. So like that, there are various proverbs or phrases that we come across in different languages. So, language shows a man. It is the image of the mind. No glass or mirror renders a man's form or likeness so true as a speech. So, the image of mind of the speaker is reflected in his expression, and it unfurls his personality. So that's very important, one has to work. And well, in expression there are various things. Sometimes we use elliptical expressions, we concise our speech. Sometimes we violate grammar. And of course, normally a teacher, the English teacher knows this in the answer scripts of many students. There's always a violation of grammar. The violation of grammar is also being done by great writers like Shakespeare. There in one of his plays, he violates grammar using two superlatives together, the most unkindest cut of all. So there is violation of grammatical code, but still it is done to create something unusual, to provide you an unexpected, heinous crime. He goes in for that. So like the various expressions are there. And then of course the functioning of verbal communication, normally we use it for different purposes. For example, we use language to demonstrate something. We use language in the illustrative form. We use language to narrate something. We use language to be reflective, to brood over something, to harp on something which is within us, like it happens in soliloquy. Or we we use language in other forms like in dramatic forms, being very rhetoric, etc. So language is used in different constructions and for various reasons. For example, in a classroom, any of these methods could be used. It could be used. Some teachers may use the dramatic form of speech to create some kind of curiosity among students. Some may go for narrative mode of expressions to render a story, or some may go in for illustrative using some theatre, teaching aids or anything. Some may even go for demonstrative mode, like explaining things, etc. So all these modes, I'm not saying that one has to imbibe all these modes in any given exercise. One can use according to the demand of the situation. As and when the situation arises, one needs to use these expressions. There are certain students, who are interested in visual code. They go by color and they go by the spectre of the elements. So we need to reinforce them with that kind of speech. There are people, as you have heard somewhere, or perhaps you may be involved in that, like we use a lot of auditory images, like the way the car took a swivel, when the car made noise when a brake was applied. All these sounds people use while talking because they are fond of using these auditory images. So according to the requirement, one can switch over to various components of language and make the communication a successful one, a better one for that matter. So then of course you have this appellative function of language, which I think is very important. In appellative language, we use different modes of approaches. For example, sometimes, we use the persuasive mode. We try to persuade student, motivate student to take up something or work on something. So you need the persuasive quality. Most of the time, or many times, command may not work. Students may be coaxed into do something, may be persuaded into do something. Well, such occasions, we need to employ this kind of language. And then we have what you call command, like presenting one's authority, one's power. Normally this happens in the typified established systems, like could be a police station, or some officer may use this language because he thinks only with that kind of language he could command over others. So that's a situational use of a language. Then of course we have phatic function. The phatic function is very healthy communication where both teacher and the student, or the speaker and the listener, will have a willingness to come together to listen to or to participate in the act. Now this phatic situation is very important in a classroom, because only in classroom we arrive at all these things. If there is a semblance of difference between the teacher and the student, if there is a varied communication levels, then automatically things may not go the way it has to. Then we have, of course, figurative speech, which of course we use quite a lot. Especially we have use of metaphors, simile, etc. In a class, especially in English class for that matter, where we teach language, these use of metaphors and similes would certainly heighten the quality of speech. Or in other words, it reinforces the strength of communication. So we use metaphors and similes, many of these things, hyperbolic expressions, etc. So there is cognitization of illustrations as well as concretization of the expression. This takes place when we use these figurative speech. Well, I think we have used these use of metaphors and speech is quite often used, excuse me. Quite often you use it in persuasive speech because the intention is to drive the audience or the listeners in a particular fashion. This is also used extremely in a religious speech. For example, the best figurative speech we come across in most of these books like religious books like the Bible or other scriptures, was there the whole idea is to drive the mass towards one direction, towards one particular issue or towards one particular person, whatever it is. So these are the things that we normally come across. So now I think we have almost covered various issues with regard to the communicator skill that one needs to work. When I use this word, I must tell you, communicative skill is not something that one gets just like that. It's a kind of a training. One has to undergo training. It's something like, of course, there are certain people who have that innate structure within them, with which they can do a better job. Like an actor, one can become an actor even without any training. But for many, training is required. So method training is important, at least to give you a semblance of understanding of what it is like, how to face a group of students or a group of people or a section of audience. What are the ways that which we can try to influence them? Because it's a living act. It's a live situation which is going on there, and both the performer, the teacher, or the performer, or the actor on stage have to have an understanding of the receptive quality of the people, the student or audience. So now these issues are to be taken care of, and of course there is of late the UGC has thought over it in detail, and now they have introduced a paper called Theatre in Education. Well, the idea of using theatre in education is not to expose the teachers, or this is happening in a teacher training program, not expose teachers to theatre, but make teachers to use the skills of tools of theatre in order to perform better in the classrooms. So that's the idea the teacher training program has, and of course I think it's becoming really a successful one. Many teachers have been benefited by this program. So I always suggest teachers to have good communication or to cultivate it. It's not something that one cannot. Certainly one can do it. One can watch, perform better, use of language, the way they use their speaking modules, etc. can be done. Now when it comes to, I just use a couple of spends time on teaching language in a classroom. This of course is a very, very difficult thing, because there are umpteen number of essays and various committees, panels have suggested that how to teach English because a second language in an Indian classroom. There are so many obstacles, stumbling blocks here. The first and the foremost is we try to learn English, which is not our language, and we do not belong to that linguistic community, and that is not the institution atmosphere. So it has to be learned as second language. So while trying to study English as second language, many of us really we do not know what are the reasons behind studying this. Are we really trying to understand or trying to read this for something better? Are we studying English language to get ourselves equipped in the linguistic ability of this language, or are we learning it for some other way? Are we studying this language only to enhance our interest in English literature? There are many, many such questions which are still unresolved. So, let us try to, and even teaching English language in a classroom is also, it has so many different people are following different methods, and many of our teachers or the people who matter in this exercise with the university, they are not too sure what exactly they are doing. For example, if I think that I'm teaching English language, then I have to work out my syllabus in a different way. Why should I be teaching them a play like Macbeth or Julius Caesar in a classroom? Because I cannot, or I find it difficult to teach English language through Shakespearean lines. I have to study Shakespeare for a different purpose. So, through literature, are we teaching language structures? And supposing we believe in that, how are we doing it? Why we have not succeeded in that? So, there are many questions like that. So, what are the different communicative strategies that we use in our teaching methods? The one, of course, is linguistic approach. Two, the cognitive approach. In cognitive approach, we use many structures that include both linguistic as well as social-linguistic structures. In cognitive approach, it is psycholinguistic formwork that we use. So various methods of thinking. For example, same story or a paragraph read before a group of students, and each student perceives it in his own way. This is what I call as cognitive approach. It is more or less based on psycholinguistic framework. So a particular story, if it is read in a class, it is understood in a different way. So that is, or a section of society might look at it in a different way. For example, it's a wonderful example that I always quote is The Empire Strikes Back. Achebe has written a wonderful essay, and then he gives you a response of people's, of an African boy studying reciting a nursery rhyme like Baba Black Sheep. Now in this poem, an Africaner thinks that who is this Black Sheep? And who are these three people? One for myself, one for my master, and one for the queen who lives down the lane. And who is this queen? So these are the questions that he asks himself. And it is all about colonialism. So then the question arises for him. So like that, the same story, while if it is read in an African society, it gives you a different meaning. At the same time is read in England, it gives you a different meaning. So these are the perceptual differences that we have. And then of course, we have other things. So basically, a teacher, the functioning of a teacher, a well-equipped teacher, both in linguistic manifestation as well as content registration, well, also happens to be a good facilitator. We have to provide an atmosphere in the classroom wherein the student thinks that he has got that freedom to express himself. He's not just a passive listener, he also has something to share, and the teacher must provide that atmosphere. So a teacher has to become a facilitator. Unlike most of the teachers who prefer to be dictators. When I use the word dictators, they're not dictators in the right term of the expression. They just keep on dictating things in the classroom for almost 40-45 minutes without looking into something else. So thereby, we have reduced the atmosphere learning to mere exercise of saying something and people just getting into it without a proper exchange of views. So a good teacher, of course, we find it difficult because most of the time the teachers would certainly ask the ratio is disproportionate. A teacher and a student in a classroom, it's a huge class and the teacher cannot pay attention to individual students. Of course it is true. In government colleges, of course it is true. So what do we have to do? Well, we can still operate there. And we can divide the class into various batches, 2, 3. And of course, each teacher can find his or her own method of creating this atmosphere, and each batch can be given a task. So it could be a task-based program, or it could be interacting between two groups, can make students to play the role models, to get into the role and do it, create small skits on the reading of what they have understood. We can ask them to recreate it, represent it. There could be a lot of questions based on that, response. So like that, learning program has to be made very interesting. Unless we create an atmosphere where learning becomes a joyful exercise, I don't think we can call it a very healthy classroom if it doesn't have that. So learning should become joyful, and student must feel that he is part of it instead of tedious, an exercise in tedious boredom. It should be a lively and living atmosphere. Well, it has to happen. How it has to be constructed, how one should follow it. Well, of course, there are certain methods there which one can follow. But by and large, a teacher has to be very, very purposeful in his exercise. He must work it out. And then, of course, it is possible. We should also be very clear about what we are doing, why we are teaching this language. And the student must also be very clear why he is learning English. Because as you all know, English is not really a compulsory language in higher education. You can choose any 2 languages. It could be Hindi or Kannada or anything. But still most of the people would prefer to study English because for certain demands of the market, I could say, or certain myths around it, whatever it is. So there is always a demand. People are interested in it. So, well, I think I must have invest the time now. I might have to stop here. Well, there are so many things to share with you, but still I would try to say just 1 or 2 words. It is ultimately, it is, I always use the word, it is a passion that counts. So teaching is not a drudgery, an exercise in drudgery. Learning is not an exercise in drudgery. It is a passion. So we need to have that passion to share our ideas, interests, create an interest among people who are trying to interact with us or trying to learn something out of it. I wouldn't say it's an exercise in, it's a wasteful exercise. I wouldn't say that because it is very important. A teacher who has all these things will certainly, who is equipped in all these things will certainly make the class a wonderful, a joyous experience. And I'm sure whatever little that I've spoken here, because such a vast subject this is and very difficult. Just one word, sentence I would like to say, because I have had experience of working in theatre with my students. So there we take about just 20 to 25 days to study a text, a play of, let's say, 100 pages. The same text is taught in a classroom for almost 1 year. But even after 1 year, the student is not in a position to remember even 2 or 3 lines of the text. Why this is happening? One of the students of theatre would remember all his lines. It could run into pages, within 20-25 days because of the passion that we have. So there is a saying, this is called in management theory, we use the word stages of learning. For example, in the beginning, we always say, we are in the state of I know not, I know not. Well, I really don't know what it is, and I do not know what it is. When a Shakespearean play, Othello or some of the plays discussed, brought into the classroom or brought into the rehearsal room, both the student as well as the actor, the theatre personalities would say, I know not, I know not. But then once we start discussing it, then they come to know, well, I suppose, I know not. I never knew that such a great playwright was there in this, lived in this world and has written so many things. Now I know that I did not know anything about it. The third level of comprehension is, now I know what I know. As he starts proceeding with the text and rehearsing the lines and then getting into the fold of the text, then he says, I know now what I know. The very conscious effort, like a person who has just started riding bicycle or a scooter, is very conscious, and he is always worried about, say, pedestrians, people who are walking on the street. Then the next stage is a very comfortable stage where he says, I know not, I know. So what I have learned, I'm not very conscious of it. It's a very easy drive on the street. It's a very easy performance on the stage. It's a very easy performance in the classroom. And a very easy performance in the examination hall also. So we need to transfer our student from I know not stage to I know not, I know. So from know not stage to know stage, I think is very important. The whole exercise of a classroom exercise or a theatre exercise would end in this situation. So I hope if one puts in effort, one tries to understand what it is, one gives a lot of importance to what he is trying to say and what he is trying to understand. If there is a level of concentration, both at the level of speaking as well as at the level of listening, and I'm sure there's always a possibility of good communication, and good communication is good work, good class work, and of course, anything for that matter. Good management too. Even in management, we need good communication. So I hope you followed something here in this, and I'm not too sure to what extent I've been able to. I mean, I was able to provide you information. Once again, this could be another exercise in communication. So let's see. I hope not we come back to the same folk phrase. Ratri ella keli, ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ ಏನಾಯ್ತು ಅಂತ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋದು. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a wonderful session. Now it is time for interaction. We have noted your questions in the chat box. I request Rekha Rai Madam to take over and ask some of the questions that are being sent in the chat box, and the speaker will try to answer those questions, and we have time for very few questions will be addressed, and the rest will be addressed later. Now I request Rekha Roy Madam to address the questions to the speaker directly.
Thank you, Raghvendra. There have been quite a few complimentary messages thanking Sir for his very informative session. Many of the questions, I think, got answered towards the later part of Sir's speech and presentation. I have chosen just about 2 or 3 of them. The first question is from Chetan Mevada, who wonders whether monolingual or bilingual communication could be used, or the use of vernacular language in classroom teaching. Are you able to hear me, Raghvendra?
Yes, madam. I am able to hear you. Sir is also able to hear, and sir will answer now.
Okay. If what I have understood from the question, I suppose the question is something like, do we have to use bilingual approach in the classroom or language approach. Is that the way?
Yes, and the use of the vernacular, sir, in
Use of
the
what?
teaching of English.
Use of?
Vernacular language.
Vernacular.
Okay, okay. Now this what is called as a grammar translation method we have in while teaching language. So the grammar teaching language is a pretty old one. So here we use, we try to understand this language too, that is second language, with the structures of the primary language, that is language which is known to us. But the problem is, I'll give you an example. Structurally, both these languages, both Kannada, English, they're different. So if I try to teach a student in English through Kannada, the problem arises because grammatically they fall into different patterns. Let's take, for example, Kannada is a language of influxes. You can use the inflections at various points. Rama Ravananu Konda. Konda Rama Ravana. Ravananu Rama Konda. Any which way you write it, it gives you the right meaning. But that can't be done in English. If three words are interchanged, it gives you different, altered, if it gives you different meaning. One. Two, using vernacular language, especially I'm talking about in English classes, using vernacular language to teach English, of course, is good in a way. It helps the slow learner, but that's not the right way. Because as I have understood, in most of the colleges, at least this is one classroom where English language should have predominance over vernacular language. But even if we convert English classroom into a vernacular language exercise, I'm sure that the student will not be exposed to language. So the possibilities of student learning the skills of speaking in English is perhaps bulldozed if it is not taken seriously. So I would advise, at least in English classroom, one has to use.
Thank you, sir. Shall we go on to the next question? There is a question from Dinesh. He asks, what will be the new teaching pedagogies in the future?
What will be the
New teaching pedagogies in the future. Teaching methodologies, pedagogy.
I'm not getting your question.
What will be the new teaching pedagogies in the future?
Well, of course, as I've been telling you, well, of course, there are a lot of changes that's going on here. If I have to focus myself on English language teaching, I would certainly say we have to improve upon our priorities now. Now, what is the priority of an English teacher in a classroom? Are we trying to teach them to use language? This is what I was asking. If that is the case, we must train them to speak in English and to understand in English. Are we training them to write in English? Do we want them to good writers in English? Do we want them to write poetry or prose or essays or short stories? No, our purpose is not that. Our whole exercise has become meaningless because we are into something which the student is not interested in. So that's the problem. So if we choose our target, and if we are very clear about our target, then automatically this will happen. If we go to other classes, I'm sure affiliate teachers or employee, and this could be one of the finest examples that what we are doing now. A year before, this was not thought of. Each college was struggling so hard to bring in resource persons from various places to organize a national level seminar or some other place. And I know how difficult it was. But today, you're not relying upon that. So you're using all the modern electronic gadgets. That is possible now. So things will go, but still, ultimately, whether we use computers, laptops, or whatever it is, a story is always a story. A story always has to begin, once upon a time, there lived a king. So that cannot be changed. Or even if I ask a computer to write a story, it would also begin with the same thing. These are not my lines, these are the expressions, lines of another great poet of Kannada, A.K. Ramanujan, who was a great linguist too. This is what he says. So a story has to have its own beginning. The beginning will not be changed. But the manifestation of stories in different forms certainly would change. That, of course, has to take place. And teaching methodologies and teaching manifestations, modes of teaching might change, but ultimately there is something to be taught and there is something to be understood. That cannot be changed. So that's what I believe.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, participants, we may not be able to take any more questions because of the paucity of time. We have to log out at 12:30. Over to you, Ravindra.
Yes, madam. Now that we have come to the end, may I request Rekha Rai, madam, from MES Bangalore to propose vote of thanks. The participants, you don't have to worry about your questions. So you can keep posting in the comment box. Sir will try to answer them later and they'll be made available to you later on. Now I request Rekha Rai, madam, to propose vote of thanks.
Good afternoon. Respected Professor S.R. Ramesh, Professor Soumya Irappa, Principal, SESHADRIPURAM College, Mysore, Dr. T.G. Janardhan, Principal, MES College, Bangalore, respected residents and members of the management of SESHADRIPURAM College and MES College, Bangalore, IQAC coordinators and colleagues of both the colleges, and esteemed participants. It has indeed been an interesting session with valuable input from the worlds of poetry, drama, music, dance, and theatre. Your presentation threw a lot of light on the various perspectives of communication, the skills involved, and the need for a sensitive approach to communication, and the need for creativity in the approaches to teaching, sir. I'm Rekha Rai from the Department of English, MES College, Bangalore, and I deem it an honor to propose a warm vote of thanks, signaling the close of today's webinar. This has been a joint effort, and of all the takeaways from this program, I'm a little wary of using this word. Two positives have emerged. One, we have had the good fortune of listening to Professor Ramesh, who has taken us through the nuances, the challenges, and the complexities involved in effective communication and the various communicative systems. The main focus of your presentation was on verbal and non-verbal communication, and it has reinforced our understanding of these concepts. The second positive is that the two departments of English have come close, new bonds have been forged, and we can look forward to more collaborative academic projects like this. Friends, we are living through very difficult times, times fraught with uncertainty, anxiety, and sorrow. The kind of suffering we are witnesses to is unprecedented. But it is also a fact that even through all this, academic and intellectual pursuit and our bond with our students have continued. And we, as teachers, are blessed that we have been able to contribute our mite. Today's webinar has taken us through the challenges and joys of communication, the very key concepts of effective teaching. Sir, you have skillfully interwoven literary theory with the process of communication. I'm sure that your valuable inputs in the different approaches will help us to enhance our teaching strategies, particularly in the post-pandemic world, where the emphasis or the move is toward a blended form of communication. On behalf of all of us, may I take this opportunity to thank Professor S.R. Ramesh, sir. Please accept a small memento as a token of our gratitude. Mr. Ravindra.
Yes, madam.
Thank you very much, sir. We would like to place on record the support and encouragement given by Professor Soumya Irappa, Principal, SESHADRIPURAM College, Mysore, and Dr. T.G. Janardhan, Principal, MES College, Bangalore. Thank you, Professor Sridevi Prabhu, for the melodious invocation. Professor Anusha, thank you for introducing our speaker, Professor S.R. Ramesh. A very, very special thank you to Professor Manu Raghavendra, who has almost single-handedly organized this webinar. Very resourceful and dynamic, Professor Raghavendra. We owe you a big thank you, and we look forward to your continued cooperation. We would be failing in our duty if we didn't thank the managements of both the colleges for their guidance. Our sincere thanks to the IQAC coordinators of both the colleges. And finally, a very warm thank you to the participants. Thank you for your overwhelming participation. Over to Professor Raghavendra.
Yes, thank you very much, madam. Now, before we conclude, I request all the participants, the feedback link is live in the YouTube chat box as well as in the Google comment box. Kindly, all of you fill in the feedback form as early as possible because it is just open for half an hour, and those who fill in the feedback form within the stipulated time will receive the e-certificate to their email IDs. Probably today all of you may not receive, around 150 of you will receive into your email IDs. The rest will be receiving it later. We will inform you the link through the mail or through WhatsApp groups. Once again, a big thank you to all of you participants, especially who have made this webinar a grand success. I also thank Rekha Rai madam for associating with us for this webinar and being so good in handling everything. Thank you very much, Professor Rekha Rai madam, and a big word of thanks to the resource person as well. I also would like to thank our management, especially our beloved principal, Professor Soumya Irappa madam, who has extended cooperation in everything that we have done. Once again, thanks to all of you and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, sir.